All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a wrap-up session with me and Dixon about our England pilgrimage as a part of the Lantern Initiative. We have held a couple of info sessions already in person, but we had a number of people come forward who said that they wanted to have that info, but they just couldn't make it in person. So we thought we'd just take 20 or 30 minutes to give you the nuts and bolts of the trip, and show you some fun slides and pictures to kind of illustrate where we're going. And we are here to answer any questions about the trip going forward. So let me share my screen and we'll be off to the races. Okay, Dixon, are you seeing the slide?
Got it.
Great. Okay, why don't you start off by talking through the, we're doing 2 trips, right?
Yeah. So actually, Sarah, I'm suddenly not seeing the screen
Oh,
or the slideshow.
how about now?
I can see it now. That was weird. Try playing it again.
Huh?
We're doing this live, everybody. Just feel it. Feel the burn. It might be my computer. It's like a glitchy version of the screen. It's like part of your screen is showing and then part of it's black.
Interesting. Let's do the small screen, and then that way we can be sure that folks can see what we're seeing.
Okay, that sounds good.
Kind of, you're seeing these things. You're
All
seeing
right.
the browser.
Well, I think the first thing we wanted to do is talk about the fact that this is a pilgrimage. And so when you're thinking about coming on this trip with the Lantern Initiative in St. Paul's, what you're signing up for is a spiritual experience that is meant to develop and grow you as a disciple of Jesus Christ. It is a pilgrimage, which is different than vacation. Vacations are wonderful and they're necessary, but they're spiritually forming in different ways. They're usually times of checking out, resting, doing things that are entertaining even. And pilgrimage is different. Pilgrimage is going to have a component of very intentional reflection that goes into your engagement with all of the things we're going to see. It's going to be designed specifically to put you in places where you're able to grow, and you're going to be growing with other people. So doing that work among a community is part of what pilgrimage is, because frequently pilgrims would travel in groups, in community. And as a practice, pilgrimage has been around for millennia in Christianity. And so we're going to be engaging it through this practice together here. Now, the kind of pilgrimage you're going to get is going to be different depending on which trip you might sign up for. So let's do the next slide, Sarah. What we're offering for this experience are 2 different trips. Both are going to be pilgrimages, but they're going to form you differently. The first is a trip that I'm leading, and it's group 1 here. And it is going to be through the Northumbrian region of England, specifically following the path of the Northern Saints. But it is going to be kind of a more typical trip that you would expect maybe to take with your church if it's an overseas thing. So there's going to be tour buses, there's going to be hotels, while we will have walking, and I'll get to kind of what that is and how that will function on my trip. It's not going to be like physically demanding. There will be access for people that have mobility issues and things like that. So that trip is going to be pilgrimage, but it'll be a larger group, and it will involve some of the kind of transportation and hospitality amenities that maybe feel more familiar to vacation, even though it's pilgrimage. Sarah, group 2, though, is going to do what? Oh, sorry, Sarah stepped out. Group 2 is going to be a more traditional walking pilgrimage.
All right, I had to go deal with the dogs. Sorry.
It's a, do you want to? I was pitching to you, Sarah. Group 2 is going to do what?
Group 2 is going to be hiking the way of St. Cuthbert, and I'm going to talk specifically about what that is. But you can see kind of the list there on the slide of all of the locations. And this will take us through some pretty rural country. We will see some ruins of cathedrals, but it will be a lot less of seeing of things and going to holy sites and so forth, and more about the spiritual practice of body prayer and actually entering into a pilgrimage experience that forces your body to kind of pray as you are meditating and moving along on the hike. So these are all of the locations. We begin at Melrose Abbey in the town of Melrose. We end at Holy Island, which is also called Lindisfarne. And the idea is that our two groups would merge together at Holy Island. And we're still working out the details of that. We're still kind of working with our tour company to make sure that can happen, but fingers crossed, it's looking pretty good that we would be able to do that. And then travel together from Holy Island to Durham, which is where St. Cuthbert is buried. And then probably end the trip and head home from there. And we're looking at traveling in and out of Edinburgh. So the two groups would fly in kind of together. We'll talk logistics about that in a second. And travel from Edinburgh down to Melrose. Dixon's group would depart and do a lot of the things that he's got listed there in that left side column. And my group would begin the hike. So that's kind of the theme of it. We have heard from parishioners that are interested in, like if you have two people in your household, one person of the couple is interested in Dixon's trip and the other is interested in my trip. And people have been asking, can we do like one person does one and one person does the other? And the answer, I think, is yes, right? Like we're seeing that that's a real possibility for people. So
yeah.
Why don't you say some more about your specific trip, Dixon?
So my trip, I think that's a really good way to frame it, Sarah. Finally, in the third session, we've sort of come to some wonderful talking points. It's like my trip really is like a seeing holy sites trip, and yours is the body prayer walking trip, which is really a great way to distinguish them. So my trip is going to be in the footsteps of the Northern Saints, and we are going to see holy sites associated with the stories of 4 crucial and key saints in Anglican Christianity. We're going to talk about St. Aidan, St. Cuthbert, St. Bede, and St. Hild, or Hilda. I've listed them here in that order. Our trip will sort of move around between those characters and sites. You'll kind of catch their whole story as you're completing the trip, but we won't move specifically in chronological order. So what I'm about to share with you is not the path that the actual path the trip will take, but it's going to include stuff that you're going to see. So next slide. You'll see we're going to be in this northern England or region of England. And specifically, if I could point to it, I don't think I can, but like we're going to be right up way in that top corner. Yeah, right there where Sarah's circling the map. That's going to be where we are. And that's most of where, honestly, the seed that became English Christianity was preserved and nurtured and grew in the 4th and 5th century. So the first person that you might learn about is St. Aidan. And St. Aidan's the next slide, Sarah. To explore Aidan's story, we are going to go and begin with a person named St. Oswald. He was a king who was kind of cheated out of his kingdom by his family, as often happened, and was exiled. While he was exiled, he encountered monks from Iona. And when he came back to Northumbria to reclaim his throne, he made a promise that he said, okay, if I do, then I will rule these lands as a Christian king, and convert them to Christ. And so he erected this sort of big standing stone monument when he made this vow. And our story will start there. We're going to go to where this monument is, and then that's where these pictures are, that little stone quaint church that's up on the hill there. We'll walk through that sheep pasture, and we'll go up to this church, and that's St. Oswald's Church. And it's beautiful, but it's significant because that's sort of where he made this vow. Spoiler alert, he wins the battle and becomes king, and he sets up his kingdom on the East Coast, and he builds his fortress in a place that is now Bamberg Castle. And Bamberg Castle, incidentally, is where they shot the new Indiana Jones movie, the opening sequences, which I'm continue to be the only one that's excited about, but I'll keep mentioning it. And if you go on the trip, we're going to talk about it a lot. So watch Dial of Destiny. But right next to it is where you see my son Aidan standing, and the Church of St. Aidan. And basically what happens is that Oswald calls for a monk from Iona to be sent over to Northumbria to be the person that starts a monastery and kind of nurtures the faith there. And so Aidan is sent, and you'll learn all about Aidan and Oswald and their fascinating story. But one of the things that Aidan does is instead of choosing to set up his monastery right next to the castle, which is where the church is that you see pictured there, he's like, I want to set up the monastery across the sound from the castle on that tidal island called what is now called Holy Island. And so Aidan goes across there to build his monastery, and it ends up being a great place to build a monastery because he has kind of a sight line to the castle, and so protection from Vikings, which is a problem, and you will learn about that in lots of the places that you go on my trip. But Holy Island becomes this kind of like thriving center of Christian practice and nurturing of Christian theology and witness in this region. And it becomes a pilgrim site. And so we are going to, on my trip, park on the mainland, and we will walk across the ancient pilgrim path to Holy Island, which, because it's a tidal island, we will have to wait for the tide to go out, and then the island will be accessible, and we will walk across the sea floor, following these posts that you see here. And it's about a 2-mile trip, and it is the path that all pilgrims have walked for millennia to make their pilgrimage to Holy Island. And they've been doing it for a long time. Holy Island is a wonderful, it's quaint because it's small and it's really kind of rural. And we won't be there in the holiday season, but what you'll find is when we get over there, we're going to spend 3 days and 2 nights there. And there will be tourists there during the day, and they'll be seeing the things that we're seeing. Pictured here are the priory ruins of the monastery that St. Aidan built. Actually, it's the monastery that was built after Aidan left. Monasteries expanded and became stone. When Aidan was there, they were made of like wood and pitch, and that's why his buildings ain't there anymore. But the priory ruins there are really lovely. This is a famous statue of St. Aidan that is on Holy Island. And like with all the other tourists, like we'll be experiencing that and seeing those things. But what's cool about Holy Island is that when the tide goes out in the morning and everybody comes onto the island, and then when the tide goes back out in the evening, people leave, and it's really quiet and there's nobody else on the island. And so you get to have these really kind of magical moments where you feel like you have it to yourself. Next slide. One of the things that you'll see is you can go and hike kind of around the island. There's a castle built in the time of Queen Elizabeth that's also on the island. And it became like a private residence. It has its own sort of history. But like beyond that castle are these just beaches, and they're full of cairns. And these are pilgrim markers that people make to mark their pilgrimage. They can be used to find your way sometimes if you've been hiking in rural areas. But Holy Island has these sort of beautiful features that are really, they're contemplative, they're rural, and it's kind of a thin, holy space, and has been for people for a lot of years. So we'll also explore the story while we're there of St. Cuthbert. And Cuthbert is basically when Aidan dies, the story is that Cuthbert is a boy and he's a shepherd in the field, and he's seeing St. Aidan's church which we had pictured earlier. That's where Aidan went to die. And the story is that Cuthbert sees the heavens open and the angels alighting with a soul being carried to heaven, and that soul was Aidan's soul, and that Cuthbert is stirred and curious and converts to this religion of Christianity that was being nurtured on Holy Island. And so he himself becomes a monk on Holy Island, and later the abbot of the monastery, and later a bishop. And if Aidan is somebody that we talk about today and we're like, yeah, he was pretty well known, Cuthbert was like a rock star. He becomes exceedingly famous and is somebody that in the area people come to seek his wisdom and want to be in his presence. And the thing is, Cuthbert didn't like it. And Sarah's going to talk a little more about this, but like Cuthbert kept rejecting that and over again, and would move to more and more remote locations. But even after he died, his body became something that people like venerated and carried around even to protect it from Vikings. That's what you see pictured below is a place called Cuthbert's Cave. And that's me standing there. And this is a cave where on one of the longest, basically the journey that started and then like over years finally ended in Durham Cathedral with his body. It spent 4 days at this cave where they like hid out. So we'll go there. You will see that and you'll learn about Cuthbert. Now, my trip is also going to involve some classical pilgrimage and some walking. And we are going to engage a path called the Camino Inglés. And you've probably heard of the Camino de Santiago, which is the one that's in Spain and in France. And it's that famous pilgrim path that lots of people have walked, even from St. Paul's. You yourself may have walked it. There have been people that are going on this trip that have done the Camino. But what has been discovered is that pilgrims that were going to walk that Spanish and French version of the Camino, they would, from England, they had a particular path that they took, and that path has been discovered and it has been excavated, and now it is being kind of developed to be re-engaged as a pilgrim path. It is formally joined to the Spanish Camino. So like when you walk it, you're legitimately walking the Camino, even though you're in England. And so we're going to go to a place called Bishop Auckland, and we're going to pick up the Camino and walk it for a couple of miles and have some of that rural pilgrimage experience where we're going to be going alongside some sort of stream beds and crossing over some bridges, and there'll be moments where the trail sort of disappears and the instructions will be cut diagonal across this sheep field until you hit the river and then turn left until you see the signs again. Like, so there's a little bit of adventure to it, but we'll have some of that experience. That particular trip is going to end at one of the oldest Saxon churches in England called Escombe Parish. And it's a really neat place to be and to see. But we'll get some of that walking. Again, if you are like, that stresses me out because I don't think I could walk that far, you'll be able to stay on the bus, and the bus will take you to where the group is going to end in Escombe, and you'll pick up the trip there. Our trip will also encounter the stories of St. Bede, and Bede is important because the only reason we know about Aidan and Cuthbert and Hild and any of these people is because of Bede. He wrote the first history of the church in England, the ecclesiastical history of the English people. And Bede's monastery is right here. It's in this area. Jarrow Hall is properly the place where it is situated and where his monastery was. And we're going to go into that sanctuary that you see there. That was the Lady Chapel of Bede's monastery. And that chair, it was Bede's chair where he sat and he prayed and he wrote. It's also home to the oldest stained glass window in England, which is pretty cool. And it's right up there. And there's a lot of signs on the wall, like the Queen has visited there and like Princess Diana was there. It's a really famous spot. And there's a kind of a larger Victorian church built around it. And there's some monastery ruins that are also there. And there's more stories about Vikings. But we'll engage. The cool thing about Jarrow Hall also that you'll get is there's a place, it's like a living history museum that used to be called Bede's World. And I forget exactly what the title of the new name is, but it's basically like Old Salem for Saxon England. So docents in costume, people like cooking on fires, like in thatched hut roofs, like working farms that mirror what it kind of looked like in the day. So you get a sense of the history and the kind of place where you're located when you're engaging these stories. And then kind of like Sarah said, the hope is that like we're going to see the sites on my trip, but we will at the end of the trip we will meet up with the hikers at Holy Island, and then we will all travel to Durham and do Durham together. And so at Durham, this is where, as Sarah said, St. Cuthbert is buried. It is also, that's the next slide, Sarah. It's also where, next slide, Bede is buried. And so both of them are enshrined there. And so Durham has been a really important site in English Christianity, both politically and spiritually. Pilgrims have been coming to Durham for thousands of years to visit the graves of Bede and Cuthbert, and we will do the same. The other story that we'll engage most prominently is the story of Hilda. Hilda is her Roman name. The people in the north of England call her Hild because they're like, why should the Romans get to name her? Hild is her name, which I kind of loved. And Hild was the abbess of a monastery who was asked to preside over a really, really important meeting called the Synod of Whitby, where the Roman Christianity, when it had kind of re-engaged the British Isles, we'll do all this history. You'll understand the story by the time we get there. And Celtic Christianity, which had been developing on its own, independent from Rome, where they got together and said, okay, we have some stuff that we want to be unified on that we're not in alignment about, like the date of Easter and how our monks cut their hair and some other stuff. But Hild was the one who presided over that and managed that, not conflict, but kind of helped find unity and community coming out of what could be a really contentious time. So her witness is kind of more important than ever. Sarah, I don't know if I told you, but like we were at Whitby, which you see on the left where the Gothic ruins are. I'll talk about that in a second. And Hartlepool, which is where Hild's first monastery was. That's the church built for her. And we're going to go to both. But we were there during General Convention. And like all the hubbub was like kicking up at convention, and we were like, we need the witness of Hild right now. May the wisdom of Hild be with these legislators, especially around like the prayer book revision, revision stuff. Yeah. So hey, when we go to Whitby, though, it's totally cool. It's famous because of the synod and the monastery ruins that you see there up on they're on a hill overlooking the ocean because it's a coastal town. But Whitby Abbey is also famous because it's where Bram Stoker set part of Dracula. Dracula comes ashore in Whitby and goes up these famous 99 stairs to this church that we'll go to with this vast graveyard with enormous headstones. And you're like, this is a really impressive place. So as I've been joking at the sessions, what we'll find when we're at Whitby is there will be three kinds of people. There will be English history nerds, pilgrims like us, and Gothic weirdos. And it's a wonderful place. Whitby was one of my favorite places that we went. I can't wait to take you there. So those are kind of the main spots that we will be seeing on my trip if you do the Path of the Northern Saints.
All right, and let me talk a little bit about Group 2 and the trip that you will be taking if you come with me and my husband Mark as my co-leader. So hiking the way of St. Cuthbert. So Dixon kind of laid out a second ago about the nature of pilgrimage, and I've always defined pilgrimage as this sort of deep longing that is in a person to go and see something or to go and experience something. And for some people, that's going to be to see holy things and to see very old, ancient things that represent the stories of our faith, like what Dixon just beautifully outlined as far as like all of these like holy sites in the Northumbrian region of England. For my trip, it's going to be more experiential. So if you feel a call to a pilgrimage that makes you sort of move your body and move it through beautiful areas and to kind of have the experience of hiking a lot over an extended period of time, then this would be the trip for you. Um, the Way of St. Cuthbert is a hiking trail that on the books, it is 62 miles. When I hiked it in 2017, we clocked in closer to 70, 75, but we had lots of like side trips to go see other things that are along the route. And there were a couple times we got lost. So, you know, sort of in your mind, think, am I ready to do a hike of about that much? It stretched out over 8 days of walking. The shortest day that you would take would be about 6 miles. The longest day is around 16 miles. And I think one of those days we stretched it to 18, and I've never been so tired in my life. If you're wondering if you are fit enough to do a trip like this, I will say I'm a very active person, but I would not describe myself as an athlete. I'm not someone that just like works out constantly, but I'm very active and I do a lot of hiking on the weekends. In training for this trip, back 5 years ago, my husband and I basically went out twice a week to hike at least 10 miles at a time, just so that you could kind of mentally prepare for how long does this take and physically be prepared for that kind of thing. So if that sounds like something you want to do, I'd love for you to join this trip. The Way of St. Cuthbert is a part of the Scottish National Trust. It was built in 1996, I believe. So it's a fairly young trail, but it is meant to mirror the steps that St. Cuthbert would have taken to care for all of the parish churches and all of the monasteries that were in his charge when he served as prior. And Dixon kind of already outlined a little bit of his life, that he was this kind of extraordinary saint and inspirational human being. He was a priest and a monk and later became a bishop, meaning like a bishop has a lot of churches in their charge. And one of the things that he was passionate about, one of the things that he's known for, is his care of the poor and being this like traveling minister who went around and ministered to all of these very isolated rural communities. So that's the outline that the path takes, is through very rural parts of the Northumbrian region. And I won't kind of repeat what Dixon already said, but that he was just kind of a cool guy. You can see this is a statue that is along the hike. And at Cuthbert's feet down here, this little blob, it looks, it's kind of small, I guess, but that is a carving of an otter, which is his little like animal symbol that you see attached to him. He was sort of the English version of Saint Francis of Assisi. He was known for his care for the natural world and for all of God's creatures. And so you often see him with animals and that kind of thing. He retired. He was known as a recluse, as a hermit. As Dixon said, he was kind of worn out by the public life and by all the things that people kind of wanted from him. So his spirituality was one of withdrawal from society. He lived in a little hut that was on a tiny, tiny island on Holy Island that was separate from the main island. And also, it's said that he might have actually lived in that cave that you saw earlier. But the life of St. Cuthbert sort of continues as one that is an inspiration for those of us who are interested in ministry out in the world and kind of putting ourselves in God's world as just interested in the ministry of the church. Here's a map of kind of where we will be. And I hope you can see all of this on your screen. We'll start in Melrose and we basically follow this pink line. And somebody asked on Sunday if there are places to kind of stop along the way and, you know, can you take a rest and that sort of thing? And I said, no. This is very different from like the Camino in Portugal or in Spain, where you're going through a lot of towns where there may be cafes or bars or places where you could stop. This is, you're in the woods and you're hiking through very rural areas. But you basically get to stay in a town each night. So we won't be camping. We will be able to spend the night in a pub or an Airbnb that offers, comfortable lodging, and which is, nice for me. I'm not a big fan of camping myself. So we will also have a luggage service that will carry our luggage from town to town. So basically, like, we'll hike from Melrose here to St. Boswell's and stay in the inn that night. And a luggage service will have carried our bigger suitcases from Melrose to St. Boswell. So when we arrive, we have everything we need. And then when we wake up in the morning, it will then carry it down to Jedburgh, and we'll spend the night in Jedburgh. So you don't have to pack more than a day pack. You can carry your water, your lunch. Each of the lodgings that we will have will provide a packed lunch that we will carry with us. And then, of course, whatever like change of clothes or emergency first aid kit you want to carry. So it's not a heavy bag you would have on your back. And following the pink line, we go across this mountain range here, which is the Cheviots. And I've been telling people that they're very similar to Western North Carolina, very rolling hills, but definitely some uphill. Like we did definitely do some uphill strenuous hiking. This spot right here, Wide Open Hill, is the highest point of the entire hike. And as you can see, it's a little less than 370 meters. So just to kind of put in your head, like that's how strenuous a hike it would be. And then hiking on through here, once we get to, I believe we cross over into the, this is all in Scotland. And then in Wooler, we cross over into England. And this section of the trail is all in England. And we end at Holy Island, as we've already mentioned. I'll just kind of show you some fun pictures of what you'd see along the way. This is Melrose Abbey, the ruins of Melrose Abbey, where we'll start. On the right there, that's pretty much what the trail looks like. It's just a little line in the middle of nowhere. And as you can see, the post, it's really well marked. So we will not have a guide that will walk along with us because we should be able to find our way. But that's how the trail is marked. You get to see some really beautiful country. Oh my goodness, we had the best weather on the day. We hiked over, this is Wide Open Hill, and hiking through the Cheviots. So you can kind of see the terrain. The trail's like right about here. And it's just gorgeous. It's just so beautiful. We also hike along roads and through private land. So we are the kind of lucky recipients of people's generosity of letting us walk through the areas where they are farming or ranching or doing any number of different things. And so we try as best we can to be respectful and aware of that. And this is where the crossing from Scotland to England, that's what it looks like. And you can see that mountain range in the background. We've already mentioned the cave, which, as you saw on the map, is right along the way of the hike, where we would get to see where Cuthbert was buried for a little bit when there was a Viking raid on the monastery in Holy Island, where his coffin was carried so that it would be protected from the Vikings. He was eventually moved, of course, to Durham. We also would hike together as a group. We're looking at maybe somewhere between 12 to 15 people in our group and no more than that. Everybody hikes at a different speed, so we might naturally separate, but some of the spirituality of this is taking care of one another and being a part of kind of a team together. This is the group that we hiked with in 2017. And as you can see, all different ages and abilities were in our group. So we were really focused on taking care of each other as we walked along. We did have some bad days of weather, so be prepared that we can't control the experience of this. And I think that's also part of the spirituality of this, is that we could have an entire day where it's pouring down rain and we are cold and miserable, like what you're seeing here along the causeway to get to Hole Island. It was pouring down rain and we did not get the fun, romantic, wonderful experience of walking along the sand where the pilgrims walked. We walked on the road because it was just too wet. So that's, I think it's a part of something to prepare for, and to think about. What body prayer does is it sometimes makes us suffer a little bit, and that can be a good thing. It can also change around our ideas of expectations and disappointments. But we did end up at Old Holy Island, and these are some of the sites. Dixon's already mentioned some of this, but St. Mary's Church there and the ruins of the Lindisfarne Abbey that you would get to see once we arrive. And I think I've covered all the details of my particular trip. I think that this is the kind of thing that if you are interested in kind of doing worship and doing group building exercises, but then kind of having a long day of hiking and a long day of accomplishing a goal physically, this would be the trip for you. Let's talk about just brass tacks details before we sign off here. We are looking at mid to late September. So this would be around a 10 to 12 day trip. Is that right? 12 days?
12 days, but that includes your travel.
Yes, like, and we were working to kind of make sure that we all had a day in Edinburgh to recover from our jet lag before we did anything significant, including hiking a dozen miles. Like, no one wants to do that when they're jet lagged. So approximately $3,000 per person. My trip might be less than that, just because of the way that the costs. We're not paying for a tour bus and we're not paying for hotels. But that $3,000 for either trip does not include airfare. And then we are working with a travel agency, a tour company in England to set all of this up for us. And they are currently making reservations for us and putting everything together. So we do not have a registration link yet. We have just decided we're going to send that out in October with everything that you would need, with kind of a final cost and final dates nailed down. So please, we apologize for being a little vague at this point, but we thought it'd be more important for you to hear what the trip was before we have the specifics of cost and dates nailed down. But the people who send me an email and have been on our list or have signed the Lantern Initiative QR code interest form, those are the ones who will get that email first. It'll go to the whole parish, of course, but if you are really wanting to secure a spot, make sure that I know about it so that I can send you the link once it goes live. What else have I forgotten, Dixon?
If you are somebody that wants to use airline miles or credit card points to get your plane tickets, you will be free to do that. When the registration and all the details go live and we are kind of have the final information, you'll know exactly when you need to be in Edinburgh and all that. However, if you don't want to mess with booking your own airfare, we do have a travel agent that will work with us that can make that happen for us as well. So that'll be an option for you. And I think it's, I think the only other thing I would say is just like when the registration closes, like you can see October 31st is the day that basically gives us the first 2 weeks of November to start purchasing airfare, which is the kind of ideal time to do it because the tickets will have just come open.
Yeah. And we would request a non-refundable deposit of around $500, I think that's what we did for the Alabama team. And the trip does have a finite number of spaces. Like I said, I'm looking for about 10 to 15 at the max. 12 people would be ideal. Dixon, you're looking at what, 25?
30
would be the maximum number of people. I currently have an interest list of like 60 people at St. Paul's who are interested in this. So we will fill up and you may find yourself on a waiting list. We did have some spots when we did a pilgrimage to Alabama this past spring. We did have some spots open up, and those non-refundable deposits were transferred to a different person. And that just naturally happens because life happens, and sometimes you can't make the commitment that you'd originally planned for. But just so you know that this will have some limits to it. And this is not going to be the last pilgrimage that St. Paul's does. Part of the Lantern Initiative's focus is pilgrimage, just generally speaking. And the idea is that we would continue with the pattern of domestic, international, for the years that we do Lantern Initiative work. So like this year we did a domestic travel trip to Alabama. Next year we're doing England. Following year we'll do something domestic, and so on and so on. So if you don't get the chance to go on this trip, there will be another one to come. Before we sign off, one of the things we really want to drive home is that there is a learning component as a part of this. So please do not register for this trip if you are only committed to going on the trip. You'll need to also commit your time coming to a couple of classes that we will hold in the spring, and then also doing some group building work in August of 2024 before the trip happens in September. So probably a couple of Sunday afternoon seminars learning about the saints of Northumbria and the history and some of the spirituality. You know, I'm thinking like April and May, those things will happen just once a month. And then in August, we'll meet like once a week for a 3 or 4 week period. It's not a huge commitment of time. You will be asked to kind of share your feelings a little bit and tell your story. We call it a spiritual autobiography. And that's a part of just simply knowing your fellow pilgrims and hearing the stories of the people that you're traveling amongst. And we feel like that's a really important thing to drive home. If we find out that you are unavailable for all of that stuff, we might have to have kind of a conversation. Are you sure this is the trip for you? And see if that's something that you could really make space for. And we're so excited. We're just thrilled that this is something that we get to do. And like, how cool is it, Dixon, that this is part of our job to like make this happen for our community? I'm so thrilled that we have this opportunity.
Me too. And I'm so thrilled that people have been interested enough to like watch a recorded Zoom info session on it. So we definitely recognize, because of your interest, that we're barking up the right tree with these kind of offerings, and we're so excited to see how it develops us as disciples.
Definitely. If you have questions as everything comes up, please reach out. You can send me an email. You can call me at the office, or you can just simply go to the Lantern Initiative link. It's been in the Monday email. It's also on our website. Just go to that link and express your interest, and I will just add you to the email list to send you registration info when it goes live. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you soon.
Bye, y'all.